In today's video, I want to go over a format I believe has been underappreciated in the overall community for quite a long time. So much so, when this format wanted to host an Olympiad team tournament only 2 months ago, it was unfortunately cancelled due to lack of signups. This is also a format that I've uploaded on my channel numerous times over the years, and this format is none other than NFE, or Not Fully Evolved. I want to try and explain in this video why I believe NFE has struggled to really catch traction in this generation and somewhat from last generation as well. It's not like NFE is a new format to the competitive community. Once upon a time in as early as 2012, NFE was known in a different form as Middle Cup. The premise was still the same, a format that allows non-fully evolved Pokemon distinct from LC that would allow middle stage evolutions to find usage and viability. However, Middle Cup had Eviolite, the most important item in modern NFE banned, and Middle Cup was played at level 50. Now somewhere down the line, perhaps in Generation 6 and going into Generation 7, NFE came to be, with Pokemon at level 100 and Eviolite legal to use, and I somehow found myself getting into NFE just before the advent of the 8th generation in late 2018 going into 2019. How did NFE appeal to me, but not to more people? What is it missing that these new other formats that gain massive communities like Uber's UU and 35 Pokes possessed? Well, the reason why I was attracted to NFE was simple. Personally, I have found myself liking a lot of the middle stage evolutions the franchise has given us throughout the generations, some more than their final evolutions and most of the time more than their pre-evolutions. Examples like Fracture, Haunter, who's my favourite ghost type Pokemon, Kadabra, Magma and so on. Not many of these Pokemon will ever see the light of day in usage-based tiering, and the best of these NFEs that end up being legal in the actual format have peaked in tiers like NU in the case of Haunter. I'm not going to speak on ones like Chanty or Rhydon, they're special cases, but the majority of middle stage evolutions are not viable picks even in the lowest tiers. NFE gives these Pokemon a shot to find usage, and even though they're just mini versions of their final stage evolutions, NFE doesn't find itself to be an OU-like tier, which some people may assume. I'm going to explain a little bit about how NFE plays as a general format for those who are unaware. NFE leans a lot into bulky offenses or balanced sort of structures, and especially this gen, I felt Knockoff to be a much more of an omnipresence. I can't speak of Generation 8 NFE because I didn't like that format, to be honest with you guys, but Knockoff was slightly weak in Gen 7 NFE because Zemus could not be knocked off. Knockoff was still an important, but at least from what I can remember, it didn't feel like every Pokemon had Knock. Now in Scarlet and Violet NFE, there's an emphasis on many Pokemon having access to Knock, which is pivotal in the first place because the majority of teams are running Eviolite to increase the bulk of Pokemon. NFE often feels so bulky because of said Eviolite and the inequality between the balance of offensive power and defensive power. Think about it like this, the general power level of NFE. You aren't going to see many Pokemon that break even past 110 in the offensive stats, and that matters a whole lot at level 100. Now think about how Eviolite boosting both defenses will go. We've seen Pokemon like Gligar be a solid Pokemon in Oras UU and SMRU on the Fizdef side, taking the power of Z-moves and even choice banded attacks from Behemoths, much more powerful than anything available in NFE. What I want to highlight here is that unboosted attacks from offensive threats in NFE against defensive threats are not dealing massive damage numbers and will only do so once Eviolites are removed. This is unlike NFE's counterpart LC, where due to the significantly lower level which affects the damage calcs, even with Eviolite, Pokemon can still wind up being 2-hit KO'd by strong attacks. A Pokemon that has been doing well in NFE recently has been Pignite. Pignite wasn't a particularly impressive Pokemon in its last appearance in NFE in Gen 7. It faced competition from pretty much every angle. Gerda and Machoke were better fighting types, bulkier and stronger with access to Knockoff, and Monferno was faster and could attack on the special side. In Generation 9 though, Pignite gained Knockoff, it gained close combat, and doesn't have to worry about Machoke because bro didn't make it into Paldean borders, and Gerda is now banned from NFE. Pignite benefits a lot from the Knockoff edition because it can knock off its checks like Quaxwell, which can take its stab fire attacks, and nothing wants to switch into Knockoff anyway realistically. Probably the most controversial Pokemon in NFE is Mischievous, a Pokemon that has exacerbated the hazard stack situation of NFE. OU and usage-based Tyrants were not the only ones to suffer from the limited distribution of Defog, and NFE was hit especially hard by this. At this current time, it's hard for me to even say if there's 4 Pokemon that are viable with Defog, I can say Rufflet, Vullaby, Fletchling, and maybe Dartrix are the only defoggers worth using, and I'm hesitant to even mention the latter two. So Rapid Spin became the main way of removing hazards. Issue is, Mischievous is a bulky ghost type that can block spin and pretty much will deny you from removing hazards most of the time. Mischievous is also one of the fastest Pokemon in the format and isn't weak with boosting options in Calm Mind and Nasty Plot. You don't have 6 boost teams either like you can do in OU, so you can see how hazards became such a powerful force in NFE this generation. Having to play around hazards, find ways of making progress with knockoff to increase damage output make NFE a skillful tier to play, especially when you master it. Now moving on to the reasons why I believe NFE is not as popular as it once was and only has its cult-like following who still play the tier like myself. The first reason I have to say, I think, which will be somewhat controversial, is its comparison to Little Cup. Now, before people believe I'm just biased towards LC, even from the Mienfu video I did, trust me, I'm not biased. I'm still on the NFE, now I'm still on the Monotype LC council and even want to develop a Chaos LC with fake mons. So clearly I have no agenda, but the reality of the matter is that LC and NFE occupy the same niche, a format of using Pokemon that are not fully evolved. LC has been around since Generation 4, before even most of you watching this video even knew what competitive Pokemon was, and still has a strong player base. LC has filled that appeal for 5 generations now, and due to its fast-paced gameplay, especially in its starting generation, drew people in because it wasn't a stall fest essentially. First stage Pokemon also have a wider appeal than their middle stage evolutions and even compete in popularity with their final stage forms. The amount of people I know that love Eevee and Piplup versus people liking Prinplup or some other random middle stage. This all accounts for LC always going to be more popular than NFE and creating the question, why play NFE when LC exists? Some may think this is the case. This isn't the case, but I do think this has to be considered. Another reason for NFE's lack of popularity simply comes to how the tier plays. Like I said earlier, NFE is dominated by balance and bulky offense, with it leading to balance sometimes more than bulky offense. Competitive Pokemon players do not like balance all that much in general. I've seen people call balance teams stall or pretty much anything with more than half the team being defensive Pokemon stally. NFE is like that, especially when everything runs Eviolite to augment their defenses. Now NFE, especially this generation, isn't as balance heavy as say last gen. Knockoff is common, spike stacking does lead to less longevity, especially when you can't remove hazards consistently thanks to Mischievous, so games are quicker, though all I can say is that Pokemon players aren't a fan of the tier's dynamics. And lastly, I think NFE not having a ladder really does stop the tier from growing. Pokemon Showdown is almost like Shonen Jump magazine in some ways. If a format has a permanent ladder, and that ladder is not getting enough games on a monthly basis, it gets axed, simple as that. Due to the reasons I've outlined earlier leading to NFE not being the most popular format, even when NFE did get a ladder, it struggled to even get 1000 games a month, so of course, the devs nuked the ladder. This means the only way you can play NFE is just by asking for games either in the UM's room on Showdown or going into the NFE Discord to ping for games. This difficulty of finding games outside of tournaments means there isn't a consistent flow of newer players discovering the tier and realizing it's a great format to play. And those who do genuinely want to give NFE a chance become demotivated because finding games are tedious. All in all, despite everything I've said in this video, NFE is a very fun format and I'm happy I managed to get back into this gen after skipping Gen 8 NFE. Though I still believe NFE is still the most underappreciated format in competitive Pokemon, there's still a player base of people who enjoy it like I do. Enough so it still finds a slot in any UM team tour and it still has its own tournament circuit, so it still gets the respect it deserves.